Under the bright lights and roar of the crowd, two blue-collar warriors walked into the ring with no world titles at stake and somehow created the gold standard for modern blood and guts boxing. Arturo Gatti and Micky Ward didn't come packaged as untouchable superstars. They came as scarred veterans, last-chance contenders with more miles than hype, carrying the kind of quiet desperation only fighters at the edge of their careers truly understand. What followed wasn't just a rivalry. It was 30 rounds of intimate warfare where pride mattered more than paychecks, and quitting simply wasn't in the vocabulary. This is the Trilogy of Terror. 3 nights of heart, pain, and heroism that turned busted faces and broken ribs into immortal memories, produced some of the most savage knockdowns and comebacks ever seen on TV, and transformed 2 regional heroes into global cult legends. We are diving back into every twist, every knockdown, every moment where both men could have stayed down but chose to rise, and we'll find out how Gatti versus Ward went from a good matchup on paper to the greatest modern action trilogy boxing has ever seen. Before their names were forever linked together, Arturo Gatti and Micky Ward were walking 2 very different but strangely parallel roads. Gatti was already a cult icon on HBO, the wild man from New Jersey by way of Montreal, a former world champion with a 40-plus fight ledger, scars over both eyes, and a reputation for turning routine assignments into life-or-death drama. He was the guy you tuned in for because you knew, win or lose, something insane was going to happen. Ward, on the other hand, was the ultimate blue-collar grinder from Lowell, Massachusetts, a 38-fight veteran who'd quit the sport, come back, and resurrected his career on the strength of that cruel left hook to the body that could fold a man like a lawn chair. He didn't have Gatti's star power, but among hardcore fans and fellow fighters, Ward was whispered about like an urban legend. Limited, yes, but if you stood in front of him, you were in for a long, painful night. By 2002, both men had more miles than momentum, sitting closer to the end than the beginning, fighting not for belts, but for respect, paydays, and one last shot at something meaningful. That's what made their pairing so perfect. No politics, no alphabet titles, just 2 honest, battle-worn pros whose styles guaranteed violence. HBO knew it, the fans sensed it, and when Gatti and Ward signed to fight, everyone understood. This might not be for a championship, but it was absolutely going to be for glory. On May 18th, 2002, under the low ceiling of Mohegan Sun Arena in Connecticut, 2 men walked in expecting a war, and somehow still weren't prepared for what actually happened. From the opening bell, it was clear that Buddy McGirt's neat little plan for Gatti to box smart wasn't going to survive contact with Micky Ward's pressure. Arturo started sharp behind the jab, but every exchange pulled him deeper into Ward's world. Mid-range bombs, thudding hooks, and brutal body shots that sounded like a bat hitting wet leather. Through the early and middle rounds, Gatti did the cleaner work upstairs, snapping Ward's head back with combinations, while Ward quietly made investments in the ribs and liver, digging that trademark left hook downstairs over and over. By round 8, the ring felt smaller, the air thicker, and both men were fighting on will as much as skill. Then came round 9, the round people still whisper about. Ward stepped in and buried a monstrous left hook to the body that folded Gatti to a knee. Pain written all over his face as the referee counted and the crowd shrieked. At 8, Gatti looked finished. At 9, he somehow dragged himself upright and, instead of holding or running, chose to trade in the fire as Ward tried to finish him, landing his own desperate counters, while the commentary team lost their minds and Emmanuel Stewart declared it the round of the century. When the bell finally saved them, both men staggered back to their corners like survivors of a car wreck, and yet Gatti still came out for the 10th throwing punches. After 10 savage rounds, Ward edged a razor-thin majority decision, but in that moment, nobody talked about winners and losers, only that they'd just seen one of the greatest fights in boxing history, a blood and guts masterpiece that would win Fight of the Year, force an immediate rematch, and turn Gatti versus Ward from a good matchup on paper into a legendary saga written in sweat and bruises. Six months after their first war, the circus rolled into Atlantic City on November 23, 2002, and this time the script was supposed to be different. Boardwalk Hall was Gatti country, and Buddy McGirt had drilled one message into his fighter's skull: box, don't brawl. From the opening bell, you could see the adjustment. Gatti on his toes, snapping the jab, sliding out of range instead of planting his feet at mid-ring like he did in Mohegan Sun. For a few rounds, it looked like a completely different matchup. Ward was still marching forward, gloves tucked high, ripping at the body when he could, but Gatti was beating him to the punch with sharp 1-2s and quick counters, painting the kind of technical picture that hardcore fans always insisted he was capable of. Then came the knockout scare moment that reminded everyone who they were watching. Gatti timed Ward perfectly and dropped him with a clean shot, the crowd exploding as thunder stood over his old tormentor. The ghost of that round 9 knockdown from the first fight suddenly flipped. But if Ward was anything, he was stubborn. He climbed up, bit down, and spent the late rounds doing what he does best: walking through fire, digging to the ribs, trying to drag Gatti back into the gutter. The difference this time was discipline. Instead of completely abandoning the plan, Gatti mixed boxing with bursts of violence, giving Ward just enough chaos to keep him honest, while still banking rounds behind the jab. After 10 brutally hard but more controlled frames, the judges had it clearly for Gatti by unanimous decision, leveling the series at 1-1. The rematch didn't have the single insane round that defined Fight 1, but it proved something just as important: that Arturo Gatti could outthink as well as outgun Micky Ward. And with both men now holding a win apiece and their bodies already paying the price, there was only one way this story could end: a third fight to settle everything. On June 7, 2003, they met one last time in Boardwalk Hall, and from the opening bell, it felt less like a rubber match and more like a final exam in pain tolerance. With the series tied 1-1 and both men guaranteed million-dollar purses, Gatti came out like a man determined to prove he could master Ward with brains as well as bravery. On his toes, circling, slicing in with fast combinations, clearly winning the early rounds while Ward trudged forward, trying to close the distance and turn it into a dogfight. Then fate intervened. In the fourth round, Gatti slammed a right hand off Ward's hip and instantly recoiled, wincing. Back in the corner, he told Buddy McGirt the hand was gone. McGirt gave him one out. "Do you want me to stop it?" And Gatti, of course, shook his head. Sensing weakness, Ward upped the pressure, and in the sixth, he turned the fight upside down, dropping Gatti with a right hand that sent him to the canvas and had the crowd holding its breath. Thunder beat the count, but from that point on, he was essentially fighting one-handed, flicking jabs and left hooks, while Ward, cut and bleeding, tried to bulldoze him into collapse. The last few rounds were the trilogy in microcosm: Gatti battling on a broken hand, Ward walking through counters and hammering away at the body, both men exhausted, neither willing to surrender an inch. After 10 savage rounds, the judges read out wide scores for Gatti, giving him the series 2-1. But when the final bell rang, neither man celebrated. They fell into each other's arms, battered and spent, knowing they'd just finished not only a fight, but one of the greatest trilogies in boxing history. When the final bell of Fight 3 faded and the swelling began, the real weight of what they'd done started to sink in, not just for the fans but for the fighters themselves. Micky Ward kept his promise and walked away from the sport, retiring with a 38-13 record and a body that had taken more abuse than most champions, but now carrying something no belt could match: universal respect. The blue-collar kid from Lowell became a cult hero. His life eventually turned into the Oscar-winning film The Fighter, with his wars, especially with Gatti, serving as the emotional heartbeat of the story. Arturo Gatti fought on, reinventing himself yet again, capturing another world title and headlining more Atlantic City nights. But each fight looked like it was withdrawing from a bank account his body could no longer afford. In 2009, when Gotti was found dead under mysterious circumstances in Brazil, the boxing world didn't just lose a fan favorite. It lost one half of its greatest modern blood and guts duet. At Gotti's funeral, Micky Ward served as a pallbearer, carrying the casket of the man who had hurt him more than anyone, and who had given him everything. In the years since, books like Intimate Warfare, documentaries, and endless replays have elevated their trilogy into legend, studied not for perfect technique, but for what it revealed about the human spirit under maximum pressure. 30 rounds, no world titles on the line, two flawed fighters who bled for every inch. And somehow that's exactly why Gatti versus Ward became the measuring stick. Whenever fans talk about heart, about courage, about what it really means to leave everything in the ring, they still come back to the same names: Arturo Gatti and Micky Ward. In the end, the Gatti-Ward trilogy wasn't about pound-for-pound rankings, shiny belts, or perfect records. It was about two men showing us the raw, unedited soul of boxing. Across 30 brutal rounds, they bled, broke, and somehow kept answering the bell, turning pain into poetry and transforming what was supposed to be a late-career crossroads into a permanent landmark in fight history. Their first clash gave us the round of the century. Their second proved that chess can exist inside a car crash. And their third showed a one-handed Gatti and a battered Ward refusing to compromise who they were, even with nothing left in the tank. Long after the bruises faded and the arenas emptied, what remains is the legacy that heart can outshine hype, that two so-called limited fighters can create something greater than any single superstar, and that sometimes the greatest prize isn't a title. It's the respect etched into the memories of everyone who watched. So whenever you hear fans argue about the best trilogies, the toughest warriors, or the purest example of blood and guts boxing, remember this saga of Thunder and Irish. Because long after the scorecards are forgotten, the Trilogy of Terror still stands as the gold standard for what it means to give everything to the game, and then a little bit more.
Queen or king of boxing, which is why he's here now.